Whether you're new to Victoria 3 or looking for a refresher, this video is hopefully designed just for you. Here are my 7 go-to things that I do at the start of any Victoria 3 campaign to set my nation on the right foot. This video is also sponsored by Star Trek Fleet Command, but more on that in a little bit. Let's jump straight in to Victoria 3. The first one is quick and easy. We're going to select something to research. Of course, there are 3 technology trees in Victoria 3, and our weekly innovation will slowly tick away at it, based off its base value and our university's overall literacy. Generally speaking, it can be a good idea to secure some of the basics here, but it will depend on your playthrough. I like things like mechanical tools, which leads to the railways eventually, and improves our production. You also can't go wrong, more agrarian nations may be looking towards intensive agriculture. And finally, if military or society reflection is in mind, I'd suggest you go for something like logistics for conscriptable battalions, general staff for providing better gear to your military units, and on the society front, if you're looking to push through some kind of political reform, then you might need to either unlock the laws through things like egalitarianism and realism, or potentially strengthen some of your yields. You can do that by nationalism to get extra authority, central archives for extra taxation capacity. This is very good for states that may not have a lot of administrative capacity. And finally, of course, give the people what they want, modern sewage that might help your infrastructure and construction. But if you were looking for technologies a little more advanced, then look no further than today's sponsor, Star Trek Fleet Command. A 4X MMO strategy game that makes you a starbase commander on the edge of space. Through recruiting iconic characters from across the Star Trek universe and building ships like the USS Enterprise, new missions follow the fan-favorite narratives of Deep Space Nine, plus new starbase alliances. The new arc also brings new officers, Sisko, Nerys, and O'Brien, 2 useful in any armada, but 1 focused on the Alliance starbase armadas. Alliances connect loads of active players from around the world, and they can be joined or created. They allow members to work together for shared progression and benefits in diplomacy, conflict, or even all-out war. Star Trek Fleet Command is available now on iOS, Android, and Windows. You can use my link below or the QR code on screen to download it for free. And why not? Take the con and journey through the wormhole with me in Star Trek Fleet Command. The next thing I like to do is balance the books, and depending on your national start, you're either going to have a pretty good economy or a pretty bad one. Here's an example of a fairly good economy, at least it's churning along in the positive. This is Korea. Their taxes are low, and their wages are average. We don't even have any consumption taxes, and we're churning along just fine. Here, of course, we'd look to add more construction and start to build things right off, before making, maybe, any changes to the budget panel. However, there are extra benefits that we can get out of it, of course, like raising the wages for interest groups. I recommend the government wages, particularly if you're looking to push for a liberal reform. This will help the intelligentsia in particular get more money in their back pocket so they can do more. The military wages are useful as well for armed forces approval, although the thing here to watch out for is to not reduce them. This will hurt your training rate by quite a bit. Even on the government wages side, you'll lose prestige. So generally speaking, we want to try to avoid this to save money if possible. Other nations will of course start in less favourable positions. Here's Piratini, who unfortunately starts the game in conflict with Brazil. It's unlikely they'll make it through, but there are always things that we can do to try and generate more cash in our society. The first one is consumption taxes. This leverages our authority, which you might want to use for infrastructure or emergency relief, enlistment efforts if you're fighting. I've covered that in a separate video, but for the time being, let's talk about how to raise funds in dire times or when we need to expand, because this will be a common problem for you at the beginning of the game. Of course, we can increase our taxes. This will hurt our standard of living, but we can do it temporarily to help raise a little bit of extra money. Of course, it'll depend on the size of your population and who's paying tax. The other thing to look at are consumption taxes. Generally speaking, grain and liquor and others will provide the most money, but here I'd encourage you to look for bang for your buck. You can see that grain's going to cost me 5 times the authority, yet produce roughly the same amount of cash as taxing liquor. So it's a no-brainer that I would tax liquor. Otherwise, I'll want to be thinking about the needs of my people. Are some goods like wood already too expensive? I might not want to tax that. Something like luxury clothes, however, could be a fairly easy one to tax, given it doesn't impact as many people. It's only the people at the top, generally, who are buying luxury clothes, so it's a somewhat safer tax to push through. We could again look to lower those wages, but we would start to take more and more penalties the more we're increasing taxes and decreasing wages, and it's particularly important, of course, in this case, to keep my military on side. So for the time being, we've done a reasonable job at balancing these books. Will it last forever? Absolutely not. So of course you'll need to look to your national expenses. Generally, this will either be your military or your construction that's causing you terrible pain. However, there are some other things I like to address at the start to fix this as well. My third tip then has us looking at the market screen. You can filter by any of these things to get a picture by just clicking on it, but by and large, we're looking for things where we have a lot of buy orders, a lot of demand, and very little supply. The big one here looks to be wood. They're color-coded, of course, based on the good type. Luxury goods are purple, military, industry, and then the staple goods. It's these staple goods that you'll want to get online first and foremost, because at the moment, our people are paying too much. The market price is too high, and that will cause our industry to suffer, but also their standard of living to suffer as well. You can see our lower strata at the moment are struggling. Their minimum needs are met, but we've got quite a way to go. And if we click into this tooltip, you'll see it paints a full picture. One of the things that they need is wood, 5.6% of their expenditure. They also really need grain, 29%, and it's priced far too high. Other things like liquor and meat are also priced too high, so I could consider getting rid of taxes to help lower the price, or of course, build up our supply. And that's what you should be doing at the start of any game. Wood and fabric to build clothes and construction will be the most basic goods to get online first. To do that, of course, providing we have trees, we'll be able to build lumber camps to provide jobs and revenue to the people. A great way to get them out of subsistence practices as well, which are terrible, generally speaking, for the economy and for their livelihoods. Alternatively, if you have some ports, convoys, and bureaucracy free, you could also look to import. Importing, even if it says that the productivity will be somewhat expensive, is a great idea to get goods in quickly, but take note that it will hurt your bureaucracy, so balance that out carefully. This next one is almost something that you should avoid doing. It's a common pitfall that I see time and time again. On the construction tab or the development tab, you'll see the construction sector. The sector uses fabric and wood to produce extra construction points for a territory. Helps you build things faster, essentially. The downside to running these sectors, although they do provide jobs and that increased efficiency, is that they cost a lot. Predicted earnings per week of minus 3,000 while the construction sector is active. We will struggle to keep this afloat, even with the goods and additional jobs that are provided by it. If we go overboard and build too many, we can build at 15 at the moment, we'll bankrupt the economy. And sure, we'll be able to build things very quickly, but can we get the people there? Are they educated? Do they want to work? Can they? No, is generally the answer. It pays to therefore balance the building of this construction sector very, very carefully against your other priorities. I'll build one here as a quick case study for what it might look like once it comes online. As you can see, the amount of weeks it takes themselves are simply too much for smaller nations to manage. However, larger nations should, of course, invest in some construction sectors, particularly where they need to build in a certain territory, or they're trying to bring new jobs and opportunities to one. And while our friends here up in the north may be struggling in their fight with Brazil, I won't cover military combat completely here. It is important to acknowledge a couple of things you might want to do at the start. If your barracks are underpowered and you simply don't have the battalions to keep up, you're going to need to build a few extra ones. Of course, we can conscript our normal populations, but we do need these trained ones in other places. Also, if you're starting as a more developed nation, you may be able to upgrade these troops from the get-go. You should, generally speaking, do that, providing your economy can handle the changes to the goods consumed. Of course, if you happen to be at or in an early war like I am here, then you can navigate to the military screen. Give your generals orders. Defend if you're the smaller power, and attack if you're the larger one. Recruiting additional generals will allow you to split your battalions among different interest groups or led by different interest groups, but more importantly, across different lines or fronts, if they're available. Generally, like I say, assigning these generals to a defensive order would be a good idea, And of course, if you're really desperate, you can jump to the military screen and activate your conscripts. Different nations will have more or less of these, and it will take away from your normal workforce, so keep that in mind. Jumping up to the more, perhaps interesting politics of the North, we do need to keep in mind that diplomacy and legal actions are a big part of our first steps in Victoria 3 as well, before we go racing ahead on 5 speed. Here, generally at the start of the game, you should navigate to the politics screen. Who is in power? A lot of the time it may be groups like the landowners at the start of the game, potentially the church, the armed forces, those kind of groups. Check in on them. See how happy they are. And of course, ultimately, you want to get a feel for who you want to put in power. Do you want a more conservative opinion of old, or a more liberal opinion? This will determine which interest group you want to beeline towards and support. That's more of a later on thing though. At the start, there are a few key changes you can make. On the government tab, you could look to reform your government at almost any time, putting in groups that you like a little bit more. Maybe you align better with their values, or maybe they'll support the kind of laws that you want to pass. Because of course, the final thing on the politics screen that you might want to do at the start is really all about these laws. The laws will determine what you can and can't do as a player, who has power and who gets money. Some powerful ones to change at the start can be your taxation system. Moving down the list towards per capita or proportional taxation can make you a whole load more money. Take a look at this. Per capita taxation will raise my current tax revenue by 6,300, doubling the amount of money we'll be pulling in. Thank you very much. That one is great for the economy. Of course, colonial expansion will allow you to colonize territories, another useful one at the start. Or you could look to shape your institutions instead. We have no police, no schools, but a professional army. This will make our battalions much better, but the lack of social services or perhaps social protections and rights for certain groups could be limiting our overall population size, the size of our workforce, or indeed how we're policing trouble. You might want to pass something like a police force, fairly quick smart, and that will unlock institutions on the institutions menu. Here you can scale up at the start of the game if you have some available to you, and I generally suggest you do that, particularly if you've got a load of bureaucracy floating about. And the last thing I like to do, my 7th fundamental thing that I like to check, is the map. The big map though. Here we're not talking about internal politics, people, or the laws that we're passing. We're talking about this big old world. You need to find some friends or foes. Generally speaking, it can be a good idea to start using some of that influence, you'll probably have a lot, to make some mates. Right-click on a nation and begin improving relations can be the simplest way to do it. As you start to improve relations, or of course, head to the political or diplomatic lens and start to actually declare some interests in territories, you'll be able to get more interesting ways to engage with them. War on the one hand, or interesting diplomatic actions like embargoes, defense pacts on the other. All nations will have strategic interests on the areas that they start. So of course, as Mexico, I'm pretty strategically interested here. And then they'll have other interests, depending on their power, size, and stretch across the globe, that they can assign to particular regions. For me, it probably makes sense to assign my second interest somewhere around this territory, because these are probably the ways that I'm going to want to either buddy up with or aggressively expand into. I'm going to select down south, and then try and make friends with the people who perhaps don't especially like me up in the north. We could even build an alliance with one and ruin our relationship with another. This is a very interesting way to build the world around you in Victoria 3, and I would encourage you, whether you're a minor player or a major nation, to build up at least 1 or 2 friends and ensure that your strategic interests are locked in on the kinds or types of places that you want to engage with. Thank you very much for watching today's Victoria 3 video. I hope that this has given you a good overview on how to start a game in Vic 3, and some vital tips to produce a whomper of a successful economy. In this case, I should scale down my taxes, scale up my construction industry, and start to produce more. What that might be, of course, will relate back to what we've talked about earlier. Goods that are in particular demand, or maybe it's the kind of goods that only I can make and others cannot. Either way, thanks so much, and thank you again to the sponsor of this video. More information down below so that you can check out Star Trek Fleet Command for yourself. Thanks everybody, and I'll see you next time.